Let's go over attribution theory and Yerkes-Dodson law. Let's do a quick review. Let's reflect back to when we covered types of knowledge and Bloom's taxonomy. It kind of sets the stage for the separation between the explicit information and the implicit. So in types of knowledge, we broke it up into those two categories: conscious, unconscious, or explicit being more factual information, declarative knowledge, episodic or semantic, and then that being further broken down. But now, in the second half, we're really looking at implicit, and in terms of the role of motivation, how it influences behavior, and how emotion can also influence behavior and learning, and conditioning, that reinforcement element. How does that impact motivation and therefore impact behavior to learn certain information? I really like how Benjamin Bloom expanded upon these two concepts, explicit knowledge versus implicit. So he took the explicit knowledge and he defined the cognitive domain. And I use that to structure the class, making sure all the assignments get you through those levels of learning. So it gives you a little bit more information, not just on types of knowledge, but how to structure it. And then I really like his definition of implicit because he breaks up the procedural, the psychomotor, and that would be your muscle memory, your skill-based activities, anything that is process-oriented, that is more unconscious, like riding a bicycle or lifting weights and having the proper technique. That is on the psychomotor side. So he really defines it way better. And then the affective side, what we just mentioned, the behavioral component to learning, the influence of motivation and emotion, and even reinforcement on learning, he defines as the affective domain. And I love that because I think it's a good visual for you to be able to break these out and to truly understand some of the major elements of learning. So right now we're focused more on the behavioral side. What is the role of motivation in learning? Let's look at Warner. He's another great researcher in this area, and he breaks up attribution theory. What are you attributing to your success or failures? Let's look at locus of control. Let's really define this. And often, if you go into a textbook, they'll give you this long, lengthy definition that's really hard to apply to your learning. I want to give you something and an example to go along with it that makes it easy for you to understand how to apply this concept. So this is looking at different traits and their impact on your performance. More specifically, the impact motivation has on your performance. So let's look at internal locus control. What does that mean with a common sense definition? That means you are in control of your destiny. When everything gets crazy, when all those external factors are out of your control, you don't worry about those. You just focus on what you can control. External locus of control is somebody that feels like others are in control of their destiny. When things go wrong, they tend to go external. They start blaming task difficulty, right? Or they start relying on luck to get by. That would be external locus of control. All right, let's come back to internal locus control and let me explain how I use it and why they define these traits as stable and unstable. So internal locus of control, if I feel like I'm in control of my destiny and I'm taking a really difficult class, I focus on my natural ability. And if I don't have an ability for that subject, or it's lower than desired, then I make up for it with effort. But what I want to avoid doing is blaming the task difficulty, because then you make excuses and you don't put forth effort because you're too busy blaming the task difficulty, and then that can change your behavior. It can actually impact your motivation. Or relying on luck. Let's go back to internal locus control and look at why ability is considered stable. It will change over time. Like you can boost your ability for subject matter by learning more about it, but it takes time. Whereas effort is connected to motivation, meaning motivation is going to fluctuate. Some days you'll be sick, some days you just don't feel like learning that task, you have trouble getting out of bed, getting to class, have a flat tire. So effort is influenced by motivation because motivation fluctuates. Let me give you a real-world example of how I use this. So I took a trig class. You had to have college algebra and trig for my associates. And I didn't prepare when I was in high school. I wasn't thinking about going to college, so I didn't put forth the effort. So my natural ability for math wasn't up to par. It improved slowly over time, but it wasn't where it should have been because I had made excuses for myself, and we'll get to that in just a second. Effort. When I got to trig, since I didn't have a natural ability, I had to put more effort. Well, our teacher left 3 weeks into the semester, and we had several different subs come in. There were 20 some odd people in the class, and by the time we got close to drop date, there were only 6. What I did to get through that class, because it was a difficult subject for me, is our book at the time had a VHS tape that went to it, a whole VHS series. So I went to the library, I checked that out because nobody else knew that it was there, and I just taught myself trig. We got down close to the drop date, and my buddy had come down from Cal 2, or Cal 1 to get ready for Cal 2, and he said, hey, I'm going to drop. Everybody else is dropping. I said, I'm not, because he was focused on task difficulty. It was not that he couldn't do trig, it was just the chaos that was created by having all these subs teaching different ways. We were all confused. I didn't focus on that. I threw effort. I had the motivation, put forth the effort to go find a way to teach myself that because I didn't have the natural ability. So I told him, I'm not dropping. They can't fail us all. I just stuck it out. He did the same. By the time we got past the drop date, got to the end of the semester, I got a B, he got a C, mainly because he just didn't go put forth the effort to go learn the material, but we passed. And that's because we had an internal locus of control. We started focusing on what we could control. We felt like we were in control of our destiny. We didn't make excuses and just give up. We actually changed our outcome. We took control of our destiny. I'll come back to that example in just a second. Let's look at confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecy. So confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecy are interconnected, meaning when I was in junior high, for some reason, I started making excuses that I was bad at math. And so therefore, I didn't put forth the effort. I could have kept my ability slowly increasing, but I didn't put forth the effort, and so my ability for math started to decline because I wasn't putting forth the effort to learn the new concepts. And I started looking for evidence to support my claims, meaning since I wasn't putting in the effort, my grades started to suffer. And I'm like, see, I'm terrible at math. I keep getting these bad grades. But it wasn't because I didn't have the ability at that age. I just didn't put forth the effort. That created a negative self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning that my expectation influenced my behavior. How did it influence my behavior? I didn't put forth the effort. Therefore, since I wasn't putting forth the effort, I wasn't getting in any better. In fact, other people were kind of leaving me behind, and I was taking classes that were super easy. So I wasn't prepared for college. And that's why that trig class was more difficult. And that's why I didn't have the natural ability for the subject matter or the ability I should have had at that age because I hadn't been preparing along the way. I had a lot of catching up to do because of that self-fulfilling prophecy. So confirmation bias, you're looking for evidence to support your claim. It can be positive or negative. Self-fulfilling prophecy means that evidence that I'm collecting is impacting my behavior. Let's look at a quick diagram of this. So I gave you the positives could be I start getting good grades and I'm not even really putting forth the effort. Maybe I have a natural ability. That information is just intuitive and I start doing good, so therefore I'm more motivated to put forth more effort. And because I have a natural ability for that subject matter, the more effort I put in makes it easier and easier to learn. So that would be a positive self-fulfilling prophecy. Same thing for confirmation bias. I just mentioned it. Because I have a natural ability, maybe initially I'm not putting forth the effort, but I start getting really good grades because it just comes easy. It could be a skill, it could be math, it could be anything. So once I start getting that feedback, that influences my behavior. So I start putting forth more effort because I'm interested in this topic. Let's look at self-serving bias real quick. You've got to be careful on this because it can lead you down the wrong path. Meaning that if I do well at something, I tend to go internal when I'm making evaluations of myself. When I analyze my own progress and make evaluations of something that I've done and I succeed, I tend to go internal. I tend to say, well, I have a natural ability for that subject or skill, or I put forth a lot of effort, or both. But if I fail, I tend to go external. I tend to blame external factors that are out of my control. Oh, I had a terrible teacher, or this subject matter was super difficult. Nobody can learn this. This is just super hard. It's too complex. I tend to go external when I fail, internal when I succeed. Now here's one that everybody in groups or even teachers need to be aware of. When you're making evaluations of other people and they fail, you tend to go internal on them. Oh, they're just not good at that subject. Or more commonly, and this is where I go wrong as a teacher, they just didn't put forth the effort. I hear that all the time from other teachers, and they may be right. Maybe that student didn't put forth the effort, but there may be other external variables going on. So if some of your group members are struggling and it looks like they're not putting forth effort or they don't have a natural ability for the subject matter, it may not be something internal. It could truly be external. So having a conversation and trying to get to the root of the problem can help you avoid fundamental attribution error. So what I typically do if I see a student struggling, I try to always, and I fail at this sometimes. Sometimes it's just a difficult person, and it's way easier when they're hard to deal with to go internal on them. But I try to stop myself and say, okay, what external factors could be going on? I'm not going to try to make excuses for them, but are there any external factors that I could help out with or control? And if I can we eliminate those and at least give them a better chance? So that's how you avoid fundamental attribution error. When you find yourself going internal, when you're making evaluations of others, stop yourself first. Don't make excuses, but be empathic, meaning it's not sympathy, but what other factors could happen? What other factors have happened to you that have influenced your performance? Start there, right? They could have sick kids. Maybe that's impacting their ability to have the time to put forth the effort. That's not something you can necessarily deal with, but at least it's something you can consider. So you're not being too hard on other people. The Yerkes-Dodson law and performance. Again, Yerkes-Dodson law, when it says arousal level, we're talking about motivation. So this is something I use in the course design. This is something we're going to use on some of the activities in class. I'm going to ask you, and it won't be just the activity we do for the subject. Once we get past this, I'll ask you for other activities. Where did you find yourself? Were you bored out of your mind? Obviously, that's going to impact your performance, right? If you're bored, you're not going to put forth the effort. If you are overwhelmed, meaning that the class is super difficult or it's super complex, you can get overwhelmed. So overstimulated. And that can cause, especially with skill-related activities, what's called paralysis by analysis. You got so much anxiety that you can't even think about what to do. That tends to happen in life or death situations where a skill is involved and you're trying to perform the skill or think about something that needs to be done and you can't because you haven't practiced it enough. It's not unconscious, it's not intuitive. And so you get paralysis by analysis because of the anxiety level. Think first aid, right? You haven't practiced your CPR, somebody goes down and they actually need those CPR skills and you can't even think because you're like, I don't want to make a mistake, I don't want to hurt them. But if, like in the military or as a paramedic, if you had a lot of repetition with those skills and you practiced them all the time, they become intuitive. They become unconscious. It's like riding a bicycle. You don't even have to think about it. If we want to go back to that procedural component of implicit knowledge. That's why military trains so much, is so that you always revert back to your training for those instinctive skills. Something that might be new and novel, you practice it so much so you don't have to think about it. So you can free up your mind to think about, okay, this is what happened, this is what I must do. It gets really procedural and intuitive. But when I design a course, I always look at these activities. I always look at the class structure. Am I boring students out of the mind? The first thing I think of is, would I be bored if I had to listen to an hour and 15 minutes of a lecture over theory that we never apply? I would be bored. I want to be able to apply it at some point in time. If you gave me a very complex task and I wasn't making the connection to the theory, I would become anxious because I'm just not getting it. So I always think when I take activities that are going to help teach the concept, can I get most, I won't get all, but can I get most of the students to this optimal level of performance? And so that's why I keep these activities relatively simple, so we're not up here. But I also want them complex enough so you're not bored out of your mind, so we can get to that Goldilocks zone of performance. All right, so if you like these topics, you can get more information on motivation here, Yerkes-Dodson law here. You see that's simply psychology. There's one of the researchers from that area. McLeod, you'll see them pop up all the time. Again, simply psychology. That's a great website for simplifying complex theories, especially for education. But you can see most of our stuff comes from psychology. So if you're a psychology major, you're going to get an overdose of educational theory in this class and in your general psychology if you take that. But that's good because that's repetition with foundational information, and you'll see how it's applied in multiple formats, not just one. And then there's some more information about attribution theory.